Man, thanks, Drake, and it's good to see you men this morning. It is really good to be here, so we could echo a lot of what Drake said just in terms of our excitement for this event and our heart for the men of our church and other churches in our area. And I know the three of us, speaking on behalf of these guys, are really honored to be invited to come up here and have a conversation with one another and kind of with you, right? Like you're participating in a little bit of a different way. You're obviously not jumping in and answering a lot of the questions, but we do want you to see yourselves as participants in this conversation. And that's precisely what we're going to do for the next however long it takes, is talk through a number of things related to exactly what Drake said. How to be not just good Christians in a general sense, not just followers of Jesus in a general sense, but men, good men, Christian men, men following a man who we believe to be the Lord and Savior of all. And so, yeah, like I say, we're pretty excited to be talking today. The way this will work is it really is an open, somewhat of a free-flowing conversation. I've got some questions that I want to walk through these guys with, and I'm going to make them take a quiz, and they don't know what each other's answers are. We'll see if they match. It's going to be fun. But we're going to have a conversation that we don't know exactly where this is going because it's not like we sat back there and practiced. And so you're going to see us talking in real time about how we think through some of these things, and then obviously inviting you guys to think through some of those things along with us. All right, so that's enough of a preview. Guys, I'm going to start with the first question, and it kind of is a way of getting at the context of what we're actually doing as, men trying to follow Jesus at a conference in 2024. So we're all aware of the fact that manhood is something that people are talking about. So I would describe it as an active and contentious topic of conversation. So manhood is an active and contentious topic of conversation today. Why? Why do you think it is that we are talking about what it means to be men and that there's a lot of, I don't know what the word would be, contention, controversy, anxiety, at times frustration, sometimes anger around some of these things?
That's a good question. I think it could be answered a lot of different ways. I think society in part has struggled to know what to do with men. What is the place that men should occupy within society just generally? And I think it struggles with recognizing the specific and the unique aspects and virtues that men possess and where those fit within society. I think men make some people just feel, I'll say this, masculinity makes some people just feel awkward, makes people feel at times even confused. Like what do we do with men in our society? Okay. And so we have all these conversations about toxic masculinity.
Right.
And all of that is masculinity sometimes toxic? Of course it is. Sure, yeah. Of course it is. But all of that is sort of a byproduct of just generally not knowing what to do with masculinity in a very modern society. Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to get too far ahead of us, but before we hop over to what Mark would say on this question, knowing that you might have a chance to expand this a little bit as we unpack different elements of this, you just used a phrase that lies at the center of our public discourse on these things today, toxic masculinity. So you would say, you think toxic masculinity is a thing, yes?
I think toxic masculinity is a thing because sin is a thing.
Okay, good. So here's what I want to know, if you would briefly, and like I said, we can unpack it more as we go. Maybe I'll just tease this as something that if it doesn't come up in the course of conversation, we're going to circle back around to directly. Because I'd really love to know, what do you guys think makes masculinity toxic? Because I see a lot of people pointing at what I would consider to be legit manifestations of masculinity and calling it toxic.
Oh,
right?
Yeah,
we see that. I think it's part of what you're saying.
Absolutely.
And yet, obviously, in the same way that there's toxic femininity or toxic adolescence or toxic oldness, I don't know. It's like anything can be toxic, like you said, because sin is everywhere. So
I think
that's a technical term, by the way. Toxic oldness. You heard it here.
I'll be offended for all of us. Thank you.
Anyway, last thing, and then we'll go to Mark. Yeah.
I don't know how much you want me to say now, but...
Well, hang tight. Yeah, you got more to say, but we'll let it unfold.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Well, I think, so for whatever it's worth, I'm 59 years old. So I can think of over generations now or decades how it's changed. I think one of the reasons masculinity and being a man is contentious today is because being a man has responsibilities. And when men don't take those responsibilities seriously, we leave a void in our homes, we leave a void in our culture, and So, and when men do take those responsibilities, it's a power grab. So I think one of the reasons right now it's a struggle is if you really want to be the kind of man, like Shane challenged us to be last night, the kind of man who stands up and says, accepting sin does not make you a greater man, it makes you lesser man. That's a great line. I think the responsibility that God has placed on men, and there are different, we'll talk about it, there's different responsibilities placed on men and women. That's not a popular statement. Right. I would get a few emails about that on a Sunday morning, but it's still true. And so men, what we're challenging each other to do is, what are the responsibilities God has clearly placed on us? And when we fulfill them, we are doing a great work. When we don't, we're leaving a great work undone that nobody else will do. So I think that's why it's contentious today, because the inequity of power, all of those issues are being presented now. So if a man acts like a man in the right way, he's abusive. And if he doesn't act like that, he's weak. And so this is really, in my lifetime, and some of you older guys might join in with me on this one, this is a different set of conversations than we've ever had in my lifetime. If a man steps into his role, he's in trouble. If he doesn't step into the role, we're all in trouble.
And let's just face it too. Like we broadly live in a culture nowadays that I would characterize as a defensive culture. So we're and that's not men, that's not women, that's everybody. Like we live in a culture that is, we adopt the posture of defensiveness on everything. So when it comes to issues like controversial issues, politics, race, gender, all these, like we go into that conversation predisposed to be offended, predisposed to be defensive. We're very insecure about our own place, our own position, our own power, and so we project that on others. And so that makes all these conversations become, sort of fraught conversations, because we're going into them like, what are you trying to do?
What did you really mean?
Right, what did you really mean by that? Yeah.
And, defensive culture, that's something to think about. That's something I think we'll circle back around to, too, as we think about how the gospel addresses some of these things. I think we also live in a flattened culture when it comes to, what it means to be men and women. And, we want everybody to be the same. And by we, I just mean our world as a whole. I think our world tends to celebrate men who manifest characteristics that are classically feminine, and it celebrates women who manifest characteristics that are classically masculine. And I think that, obviously it's important to not put people in too tight of a box, but that to me is a symptom of a deeper issue that really it emerges if you think about the changes in the nature of our society as a whole over the last couple hundred years. That a few hundred years ago, the roles were necessarily defined. Roles for men and women were necessarily defined by capacity for physical labor. You guys we may have talked about this before, but I remember hearing about a show. It was like one of those reality TV shows where they had couples of different ages, and the whole point was like to survive with the technology from a different time period. So I don't remember the details, but it was like, they put these couples on a house that had all the technology that a family would have had in like 1750 or something. And it was like, all right, y'all survive. And there was an older couple that immediately went into pretty classic roles where the man, I think there was not old, I just mean not in their 20s. The man immediately started setting about the tasks that were a little bit more physical labor oriented, which meant mostly outside and away from the actual home. And the woman, immediately kind of went towards some of the classic tasks in the home, that kind of thing. And there was a younger couple in their like 20s or something, and they were like, no, we're not going to roll like that. Like, we're just going to everybody's going to do everything. And so they kind of started with a less defined division of labor. And pretty soon they realized this actually doesn't work very well, because their differences in physical strength manifested pretty quickly. And it was like, well, this isn't some sort of ideology. This is just practical for me to do these things and you to do those things. Now, what I'm not saying is it's better for women to work and, sweep the floors and dudes to, take out the trash or something or do stuff outside. But I am saying the changes in technology, I think, are related to the changes in our society where, because the rules aren't defined for us, there's a little bit more of an openness to, and I hate this line, be whatever you want to be, and that causes confusion. I think about that with my kids, and I think about that with the young people we minister to at the college. They're getting married, and it's like, well, what is the role of a husband and wife? It's like, well, that's a complicated question now.
Yeah, we see distinctions as, broadly,
yes,
see distinctions as a bad thing.
Right.
So distinctions are a bad thing. So we live, like, you think about media, you think about television commercials, whatever, like what is always celebrated is when boundaries are crossed, so it doesn't matter how old you are or how young you are, it doesn't matter what gender you are, like the distinctions are bad.
Yes.
And so we want to bring down those distinctions every chance that we get. And that obviously leaves men in a kind of an awkward position, in a difficult position. Like, if nothing really matters, if gender doesn't matter, if age doesn't matter, if none of these distinctions matter, then as a man, like, what is my unique place in the family? What is my unique place in society just broadly? Like, if I'm being told over and over and over again that none of this stuff matters, it leaves men feeling, and this is where masculinity can then become toxic. Yeah. Because then you'll have men acting out some of their worst inclinations out of a sense of alienation to the culture just broadly.
Yeah, there's a difference between bowing up and manning up. Bowing up is, the sort of, I'm going to put on the false front, I'm going to peacock to keep my place, whereas manning up, well, I think that's what we're talking about. So, all right, let me ask you this. You got something else to say for now? So what are 2 to 3 main differences between men and women? So I'm going to let the question lie. Like, in general, okay, so since you're giggling, let me ask you this. Scale of 1 to 5, how hesitant are you to answer questions like this? 5 being very hesitant, 1 being let's roll. And how different would that answer be if this was a mixed room, right? Like, let's talk about the question and then answer the question.
Okay, so let me start. I've been married for 37 years, and I've known my wife for 40 of those years. I don't have a clue. All right? I've lived with one of them, and all joking aside, we're different. So in the studies that I've been able to do at the master's level, and that's not a flex, I want to tell you this isn't my idea. This is some research that's been done. Every single human being wants 3 things, okay? They want inclusion, they want control, and they want affection. Now, even when I use the word affection, what a man means by affection is not what a woman means by affection, and we instantly know that to meet a woman's needs of inclusion, control, and affection is a lot different than what we want. Could we agree on that? That in and of itself explains a lot of the differences. Like, fellas, when we get together on a Friday night, and I say, hey, do you want to hang out on Friday? You're going to ask me a fundamental question. What are we going to do? Yeah. Women don't ask that question when they get together. That's why they can have a 5-hour salad lunch. Because their inclusion is being together. It's relational. When we get together, we kill and count things.
And compete, yeah.
That's what I mean. We're going to count. There's going to be a winner. There's going to be a loser. And we're friends at the end of it. Put females in an environment where they're competing against each other, they won't come together. So just fundamentally, it is okay for us to say God made us differently. That's why I jokingly say I still don't know what my wife wants. I know what she doesn't want. That's been made crystal clear.
All right, Chad, what are some unique...
He didn't give the 1 to 5 answer.
So 1 to 5, how comfortable you answer?
In this room, 1, it's simple.
Yeah,
on a Sunday morning, I ain't answering it.
All right, Chad.
Yeah, I would be the same way.
Yeah, 1 and 5, like top to bottom of the scale, okay.
So I would want to start with this biblical observation, that the distinction between the sexes is a creational good. In other words, this is something that God created on purpose. Like, this is a part of his design. I don't think God created us in such a way that things like sex don't matter. Like, the difference between male and female does matter. It matters to God. And so I don't want to adopt a position as a person who wants to be a biblical person where I say, really, there's no distinction. It doesn't matter, like, male, female. Like, actually, that's not the way that God designed things. That's not the way that God intended things. So that's one of the first points that I would make. Going with something that Mark just said, I've heard it put this way, that women kind of face the world face to face. That's how women face the world. Men face the world either shoulder to shoulder or back to back. The way that we face the world is we go into the world side by side together, facing a common task. Sometimes that common task is playing a video game together. Sometimes that common task is hunting together or golfing together or working on a project together. But we go into the world shoulder to shoulder. If you went into the world with another man like this,
Stop it, man.
it gets super awkward really quick, right? That's not how men enter the world. Or sometimes
the weirdest moment we've ever had, Chad.
Or sometimes men enter the world back to back, where you're facing common challenges, common foes, like you've got each other's back, and that is just a fundamentally different way of entering into the world. Now, I think all three of us would acknowledge these things are on a bell curve,
Absolutely.
right? These things are on a bell curve. So obviously, there's going to be exceptions to everything that we say up here this morning.
And some of what we want to talk about, because some of you may be thinking, well, I'm not like a whatever your picture of a man is, maybe you're not classically that. And so this will come up later in some of our questions, because I think it's a really important thing to talk through is, well then, if there is this sort of picture of manhood, and it does involve some of these things that tend to characterize men in contrast to women, does that mean that a guy with a more feminine personality in some regard is less of a man? And I think we have to answer that question, right? Because one of the different distinctions that comes out of the research is that, as a general rule, men are more interested in things and women are more interested in people. And that's, I think, one of the things that has been most consistent across the various types of research from all different schools that have looked into these things. But there are some men who are more interested in people, right? And I'm not saying that makes that man less of a man. It's just, let's just acknowledge the general differences as a part of how we understand the world. I do want to ask y'all a question that I'd be wondering if I were in the room. So not so much on the differences between the two. I know I have one more thing to share on that. So I don't know that I would ask this now, because I think I get what we are and aren't saying. But if you would put me 10 years ago in here, and we're laughing about how you guys are saying you're a 1 now but a 5 if the women are in the room, why? Like, I think what I'd be thinking is, are you guys afraid of your women? Like, what is that? Like, flesh that out. Why are we? And I'm not saying that's the case, but articulate why you are more cautious or prudent in answering a question like this today when you're in a mixed group of people.
I'll let Mark answer.
Yeah. So, and I was like seriously joking, because no one steps on a landmine intentionally. I think the issue is, back to what Chad opened with, the suspicion is, what do you really mean by what you say? And so that's one of the reasons in a mixed crowd. I was talking to Jacob this morning. One of the things that's always got to my male pride, and I'm just going to confess it right now, what gets my male pride is when someone tells me what I'm thinking.
You do hate that. If you guys want to get at Mark, you should do that.
And don't even joke, because we're going to war, okay? Remember, kill and count. I'm all in.
No. What you mean is not kill and count.
No,
Mike.
I know. What I mean is, ask me what I'm thinking. Don't tell me what I'm thinking. And the reason I'm hesitant to tell women what they're thinking is I don't really know.
Yeah.
The approach should be, tell me why you responded that way. But when they tell us, well, men are always like that, does that make you bristle too?
Right.
Yeah, I'm not a collective. As Shane pointed out, I'm an individual trying to live in a collective. That's a difficulty. Yeah. So that's why, jokingly, I say, I wouldn't say it on a Sunday morning. No, I would be very, very careful, because every word is going to be parsed and every thought is going to be challenged. And it's not going to be challenged, hey, we like Mark and we trust him. The suspicion pops. And that's why when we speak in generalities, we will offend somebody all the time. So we need to be very careful what generalities we speak in. That would be my point.
Yeah, and I would say the same thing. There's just so much potential for misunderstanding both ways. Like you pointed out, it's easier for us to speak on, what it is like to be a man. Much more fraught, obviously, to speak on, well, here's what it's like to be a woman. So there's all sorts of potential for misunderstanding. And I'm like you. I hate it when people want to put thoughts inside my mind. I will say this, though. Like, if I were speaking to a mixed audience, one of the things that I would, without hesitation, talk about to the women in the room is your homes, your families will be blessed by having men in those families who are godly, who are strong, who have a disposition of protection towards us. Like, your life, your family will be blessed not by minimizing who your man is, but by actually celebrating who God has made the men in your life. Like, I think that's a message that needs to be declared loudly and strongly. Yeah. Our families are blessed when our men are strong.
Good. Yeah.
I know you want to jump.
No, go ahead.
Our families deserve men who are strong. That's on us.
Yeah. And, one of the, we'll move on from this question here pretty quickly, but I actually love the way my wife describes this part of her answer to this question. What are the differences? And she uses a scenario to depict this. She says, imagine, we're in a room. We were talking to some of our students about this. Let's say we're in a room, and Beth is there, and I'm there, and our kids are there. And somebody comes through the door with a weapon seeking to harm. The way she described it is, both of us would stand in between that person and our children. And Beth would stand in front of our kids with her arms back, covering them behind her. And I would move toward the person to do something about the situation. And that would just be our natural instinct. And I'm not saying that every woman would do precisely what she would do and every man would do precisely what I would do, but I think there is something in that analogy that gets at the differences, that we are doing a task together. We are fighting evil and protecting the vulnerable together, but there's a difference in the way we might go about that, in the ways that we will position ourselves in the various situations we find ourselves in. All right, so let me jump ahead a little bit, and we're going to do a true-false quiz, all right? So here's the way this is going to work. I've kind of laid this out for these guys. They don't know what each other's answers are, and I'm going to say a statement, and in some cases, the statement might have two statements in it, and they have to say true or false to the whole thing. Now, you guys cannot cheat. You can, you have to say one or the other. And then afterwards, you can talk about how you hate me or why, true and false doesn't work. That's fine. But I want you, if you had to say, I'm interested in what you'd say. So I can't remember if we have these up on the screen or not, but I'll read them. I'll try to read them. They're not super long. So some of these we'll talk about real briefly.
How are we
Some of them
answering
will take
these?
a minute. Okay, I'll say the statement,
Okay.
and then I'll go 3, 2, 1, and then you say true or false. Does that sound good?
Sounds
you guys
good.
good with that? I know you guys don't like being controlled. So are we okay with this? All right. So the first question is, apart from God, men are the most powerful force in the world. There you go. You will have the statements up there. All right. So apart from God, men are the most powerful force in the world. All right. 3, 2, 1.
False.
Okay. Flesh that out.
Mark?
Well, yeah.
The wisdom of Chad.
If you have a tornado shelter, you've just told me why it's false. We can't control nature. We can't control so much going on. Whatever power we have is only relational to human beings. There's something bigger working.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's a good answer. That's why I answered false.
I feel like you guys are being safe. All right, fair enough. I'll leave you alone for now. Okay. Next one. Men have a unique responsibility before God. All right, so again, men have a unique responsibility before God. 3, 2, 1.
True.
Okay, what is it? Chad, you have to go first.
I think our unique responsibility before God is the responsibility of leadership and protection. Okay. If I just keep it as simple as that, leadership and protection.
Can you since the word protection we get, since the word leadership can be defined in so many ways, do you have like a simple, compact, here's what you're getting at when you say that word?
Yeah, what I'm getting at, especially when I think about the home, is I think the leader's responsibility is to guide those who have been entrusted to me, guide them into righteousness and wholeness. That's my job as a leader. It doesn't mean like I have to be the one that pays the bills, and I have to be the one that mows the lawn, even though I am the one that likes to mow the lawn. That's not really. I think leadership. We define it in very narrow terms. I think it's more appropriate to define it in broad terms. That it's my job as a leader to make sure that this family is moving in a direction towards God, moving towards righteousness.
So does Tara bear no burden of responsibility for that?
No, of course she bears some
Okay,
responsibility.
so what's unique about yours?
Well, that's a good question. I think
Thank you. I thought so too.
I think it's my job to set the pace. I shouldn't make it her responsibility. That would be advocating my responsibility. It's my responsibility to set the pace. It's my responsibility not to be responsive to that conversation, but to start the conversation.
Okay. What say you?
Well, he used the word leadership. I would only flip it a little bit. I think it's to protect and provide. And so one of my jobs as a man in our home is to make sure that the provisions our family needs for spiritual growth and physical growth and safety are all provided. I'm not the one who has to provide all of it. In fact, if any man's honest in this room, it is my wife's home and I get to live in it. And she does a better job of it. I don't give her permission to keep the home. It's her nest, and I just get a branch, right? So because of that, I think provision is something I'm always looking out for to make sure we're safe and good and healthy and sound and peaceful and all of those things. So I think men have a unique responsibility, and that's not acceptable today. It's still true.
I think not only do they have a unique responsibility, I think they have a unique inclination. I just think that's how men are typically wired to do these things.
So let's drill down into some specifics. This isn't one of our questions, but you mentioned provision. Now, provision's bigger than finances, but provision, we think about finances. So does a man need to make more money than his wife?
I'm the case in point you don't. And I have no problem with my wife being a sugar mama. I have no problem whatsoever. No, I think those standards of the breadwinner, no, I just think we need to make sure we have bread.
So distinguish provision and breadwinning. One more time, if you would. Articulate the difference in what you mean between provision and, because you're saying you have a unique responsibility to be the provider in your home. And yet she's the breadwinner.
So the reason I like protect and provide
Yeah.
is because the provision is coming from the goal of protecting.
Okay.
Protecting all the interests, as he said, to make sure my sons understand the seriousness of who Jesus is in this world. So that's what I mean by provision. I have an accountability before God to make sure my family is cared for and well led, whether I'm the one leading it or not. You sit under a pastor. You better choose whether you can trust that pastor to guide you well. That's your responsibility as a father and a husband in your home.
Anything to add? Okay. Here's the next one. It's kind of a silly one, but we'll see what you guys say. Men should wake up earlier than women. All right. I don't think I need to read it again because it's clear enough. You ready? 3, 2, 1.
False.
Okay.
I'm married to a nurse, so that doesn't happen.
It's true. She hardly ever sleeps. Let me ask the real question. What responsibility should a man feel to establish and maintain personal discipline, to be a disciplined person in all facets of life? And I'm using waking up early as a symbol of that. And maybe this is the kind of thing where you would say there is no difference between the responsibility of a man and a woman. Let's leave it off for the moment. To what degree should every man say, part of my responsibility in this world is to be a disciplined person?
Okay. I can answer that from a heart level. Guys, every one of us is wired. It's the one thing when our wives don't provide it, we hurt over, and that's respect. We want to be respected. We know we've given them reasons not to respect us, but we want to be the kind of men that can be respected. So my answer to the question then is, then be one. Give them a reason to respect you. Be a man of integrity. Keep your word. Don't make her wonder. Right? These are things that if you ask your spouse, your girlfriend, your female friends, they'll tell you that they give respect easily until it's broken. And so I would just simply say, for me, the answer to that question is, yeah, you need to be a man of discipline because that's what they desire, and really that's what you desire, is to be someone that they could look at. And I ask my wife every year on our anniversary, I'm scared of the answer every year. And I always tell her, would you pick me again? And I know she should say no. And every time she lies to me, I'm happy.
I think every follower of Jesus has a responsibility to manifest discipline in their life. Male, female, old, young, doesn't really matter. And I think God positions each individual to manifest discipline in different ways in their life, depending on, the circumstances of their life, But I think just broadly speaking, I think one of the ways, and I think this is a question you're going to get to later on about, a biblical text or whatever.
Yeah.
I think of that text in Ephesians where it talks about a husband and a wife and their relationship. And what Paul says to men in particular is, husbands, you love your wives as Christ loved the church, giving himself up for her, right? And so one of the ways that godly men manifest discipline in their life, demonstrate discipline in their life, is through the regular demonstration of self-sacrifice. That is a uniquely masculine trait. Not that women aren't also called to self-sacrifice, but men uniquely are called to demonstrate this mindset that says it's not for me, it's me for you, it's me for us.
I wanted that to be my answer.
Okay, see, a stupid question leads to good wisdom. That's awesome. Good job, guys. Here's another one that I'm interested in. I genuinely want to know what you're going to say. Physical strength is a fundamental aspect of authentic masculinity. So again, physical strength, fundamental aspect of authentic masculinity. 3, 2, 1.
True. Oh, I thought we'd disagree.
Hey, you guys need to disagree on something. Or I need to do, maybe I'm just going to pick the opposite position on one of these and we'll fight it out. So, okay, does that mean that less muscles equals less of a man then?
Well, then we know who's less of a man on this stage.
Do we? You want arm wrestle? You want fight?
Kill or count, people.
Yeah,
Kill
no doubt.
or
You better
count.
Be careful, man. We're gonna have an altercation up here. So
You know I couldn't resist
I know
that.
you're playing. Well, I know.
Am I, though?
whatever. Yeah. Are you? Let's go. I don't know. So answer the question though, right? Yeah, I mean, we could joke about me, I'm
I
skinny,
think-
but you know what I'm saying?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
some
yeah.
dudes are just bigger. I mean, I don't want to pick anybody. There's a couple of y'all in here that make all of us look bad, right? There's a couple of you who spend more time in the gym than anybody, including Spencer. So
here's,
what do you say?
Here's the complicated thing about questions like this. So I think of my grandpa, okay? My grandpa fought in World War II. My grandpa built their home that they lived in for 70 years, built it by hand with my great-grandpa. They lived in a single bay garage for an Illinois winter with 2 newborn twin babies, while my grandpa and my great-grandpa hand dug with shovels the basement of their home in Decatur, Illinois. And so I think about that a lot, and I think, how would my grandpa regard my own masculinity? You know, like, I know how to check the oil in my car, okay? But honestly, I think every man in this room, no matter you know your occupation, no matter your strength, like to men who lived generations ago, they would look at you like, really? So you're driving to work every day? Well, that seems kind of weak to me. You know, like.
Yeah.
So that's the difficult thing about this question is like that. The measure of strength, the measure of quote unquote masculinity, it kind of changes from generation. It changes from place to place if you're living in a more kind of rural setting or an urban setting or whatever. But I think generally speaking, it's obviously the case that God has made men with physical strength. And so we've got to ask ourselves the question,
Greater
physical strength.
yeah,
So
yeah.
we should ask ourselves the question, like, why?
Right.
Why is that? Is
Yeah.
that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Is that just a thing? Well, if God made us that way, then I've got to believe that that is, in fact, a good thing to be used in the service of other people, especially those people who fall under our leadership and our protection. So I think, yes, it's not a bad thing. It's not something we should be ashamed or embarrassed to admit that, yes, it is a good thing for men to be physically strong.
And I think I know how you would answer this then. And this is the way I think about it, is I think a man should feel a responsibility to be as physically strong as he can, given his body and age and circumstances, right?
Sure.
So it's not about comparing yourself to another man, but it is comparing yourself to maybe who you were in the past and who you're trying to become. That it isn't about how good you look in, at the gym, but it is about your readiness to serve people in ways that may be called for, in situations where you may be called upon to do them. And that, I think, is where what you're saying, that physical strength is something that we should feel, and not that women shouldn't try to be physically strong or healthy or whatever, but nobody who's paying any attention to reality would suggest that men and women are equally physically strong. And so creation itself teaches us that this is a part of it.
Yeah.
What are you thinking?
I'll just be quick. Chad did so well. We are physically stronger than women as a general truth. So that's why I answered true. And I also think if you go back even in Old Testament times, who went to war? Who fought the hand-to-hand battles? It was the men. The women were not invited to war. There is something inherent in the way God made us that physical tasks come easier to men than women. So thusly, we should serve that role and serve our families the best we can with that.
Great. All right, here's another, this is a two-part question, or two-sentence question. So here they are. Marriage and fathering are central to authentic masculinity, and single men are just as much men as married men. So true means you think both are true. False means you think either one of these is false. So hold on. Marriage and fathering are central to authentic masculinity, and single men are just as much men as married men. Okay? 3, 2, 1.
True.
Okay, good. So on paper, these two seem like they're in conflict with one another. That's sort of the obvious point of this. So Mark, why don't you kick us off on this one? Articulate how both of those can be true.
Because before the fall, God created Adam and Eve, and he told them to become one and have children. So that in and of itself means it is a natural thing for us as men. I also believe the second statement is the Apostle Paul says that not everyone should be married. That is a gifting from God to not be married, to be celibate. So because of those two truths, I can answer this true. Once again, the social complications hit me like waves. But I do think it is central to our identity to be bound together in community, even in marriage, and to procreate and have children. It's one of the blessings of life, and it's what God created us for.
You want to add anything?
No, I don't think I'd add anything.
And part of what I think is valuable about thinking this through is it helps us understand things that we've forgotten that Scripture teaches, and that being men and being women is oriented to marriage, because marriage is oriented to something bigger than itself. If we remember that marriage itself is a sign of something bigger, a sign of a relationship between God and people that produces new life, then we can understand that, sure, like marriage is important, and it is why we're gendered creatures, but marriage is not the goal. The goal is what marriage points to, people having a life-giving relationship with God that results in the multiplication of life. And this is what I think drives Paul's comments on singleness, that a single person might not be participating in the signpost marriage, but he's participating in the reality, or she's participating in the reality. If a man is single and walking with the Lord in a way that produces life for others, calling people to follow Jesus and making disciples, then they're actually living out the thing that marriage was designed to signify. So I'm probably making a couple of not complicated, but a couple of logical jumps in just a few lines, but hopefully you can see the connection there, that it is true. I remember one time we asked my son, I was with Drake actually, we were at a camp in Colorado, and we were talking about manhood, and Drake said, I don't remember if it was me or Drake, but we asked my son, he was probably like 8 at the time, hey buddy, what does it mean to be a man? And my son said, I don't know, growing up to be a dad? And I felt like that was a pretty profound answer. Now, he meant it in a simple sense because that's what he's seen. But I think if you think about that in that broader sense of growing up to be not necessarily someone who has his own biological or even adopted children, but a man who has a fatherly presence in the world and a man who's ready to take care of those with whom he works in a way that pushes them toward God. Anyway, too much. Let me go. All right, next one. Another two-parter. We got to move pretty quickly, huh? The clock is flying. A man's job is to protect and provide. Not so with women. So you've both used this phrase, protect and provide, but so you'd say that's a man's job. Okay, great. Is that not a woman's job? That's what I want to hear. All right, so a man's job is to protect and provide, not so with women. 3, 2, 1. True.
False.
Oh, finally! Took me forever, but we finally did it. All right, I'll move back. You guys can fight now. Okay, explain your answer. You said true, and you said false. So you say true. Man protect and provide, not a woman's responsibility. And you're saying, okay, so who wants to go first?
I'll go first. I think I can anticipate why Mark's answer. I'm going to put thoughts into Mark's head, see how he likes it.
Great idea.
My favorite thing. Tell me what I'm thinking, Chad.
I think perhaps that men and women do protect and provide maybe in different ways. And I think there are certainly plenty of households where the husband, for whatever reason, has abandoned that duty, and women, because women are awesome, step in to fill that role because it's a role that needs to be filled. But I think, by and large, it is the responsibility that men have been given to protect and to provide for their families.
Yeah, I do. I actually tried to guess the opposite on this one. I think the only difference is the way my wife protects and provides is in cooperation with me, but it's unique. The things she assesses that needs to be cared for are things I would never see. Like she'll ask if we're having something here at the church that I'm organizing, and she'll say, "You're having food?" And I'm like, "Yeah," and she gets nervous. Will there be plates? Will there be silverware? Will you put a decoration on the table? No, and no. There's going to be food, right? So the way she provides for our family is in a very unique way that is attuned to her children. Does that make sense? So that's why I just made the distinction.
And one of the things, when we're thinking about these things, I think about the home and we think about the church. And one of the things we believe as a church is that God has called and equipped men and women to serve together in ministry. That God has gifted us all in different ways, and that the job of a church is to facilitate the giftedness of people in the church, men and women. And within this picture, we believe that God has created the church to function like a home with fathers leading it, and that's elders. Elders are given the unique responsibility to, in certain ways, lead the church. And elders, we believe biblically, it's a role for qualified men. And one of the things that I really wrestled with as a couple of years ago when these guys invited me to consider stepping onto the elder board was, okay, well, what is the actual responsibility of an elder? And so I just I mean, I didn't know what else to do other than this, so I just read through the New Testament and tried to make note of every time the eldership role was discussed to try to figure out what is unique about this role. And what I discovered is it wasn't that elders do things others don't do. It's that they do those things differently. So hopefully you guys pray for other people in this church. But the elders, as the fathers of the church, have a unique responsibility in the way they pray for the church, right? Hopefully you guys pay attention to some realm, or in your own church, some realm of the church, and you're trying to do what you can so that good things happen there. Well, the elders' responsibility is to see the bigger picture in that regard. So you get the idea. And I think something similar in this regard. It's not that we do different things fundamentally, it's that we do the things differently, right? So provide and protect. I think that is a fine way of summarizing the biblical call on men, but part of the point of this question is to recognize it's not quite that simple. It's a little bit more, well, we all do this, but men lead out and women come alongside. And this, I think, is even at some level the biblical picture of manhood and womanhood. Now, I'm generalizing, but men are, at some level, initiators, and women are completers or perfecters. You even see that in Genesis 1 and 2. So the man is created first, but there's a lack, and the woman is needed in order to bring completion to the picture. And there's something in this creation of men and women in this order with these statements made about them that I think helps us understand some of these questions even today. All right, let's see. We'll move pretty quickly through some of these just to make sure we get time to share some stuff later on. Next one up, men should not be soft. 3, 2, 1.
False.
True. Okay, I didn't expect this one to be different. What do you mean false?
Men should be soft. I see Jesus call a woman who hadn't been touched by another human being for 10 years his daughter. I see him call a man lowered through the ceiling on a pallet his son. I think those are gentle moments. So my interpretation of soft is why I answered that way. It means tender. That's how I would see it.
So gentle, tender. You hear Jesus saying, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, because I'm gentle, and humble in heart."
I think Shane addressed it last night, and I was talking to Jacob this morning about it. That there was a generation in the 90s, there was a particular book out, and I won't trash the author, I'll trash his book though. And it felt like if you're not climbing a tree and eating bark and sleeping out under the stars, you weren't a real man. Well, hair on your chest doesn't make you a man. So I think being soft is being compassionate and kind and gentle in the right, proper moments. And then there's another time for us that I think it's of God for us to stick our boot up someone's hind end and tell them to grow up. Mm-hmm. So I don't think we're supposed to be weak and pushed around. But man, if there's not a gentleness and tenderness to us, we've misunderstood Jesus.
I love that. That book changed my life, but it is messed up in certain ways. I'm not even kidding. It did. It healed my heart. But then he acknowledged later on that he was being one-sided. Go ahead.
I want to change my answer.
Do you really? No, but okay.
I think
I want somebody to say what you said because you're defining soft differently.
Yeah, if you define soft as gentle, then yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean,
yes.
that's fruit of the spirit.
Yeah.
Like I think of especially my relationship with my daughters. I wanna be warm and safe, and I want to be a gentle person for them, and I want them to have in me the example of a man who is tender in that way, who is loving and gentle in that way, so that then when they go out and they're looking for a husband to marry or for a person to marry, that's what they've already seen in their dad.
Yeah.
So I think that is important. I think so. We shouldn't be calloused. If you're harsh. If your understanding of strength is that strength means that I'm calloused, I'm removed, I'm harsh. That's not strength. That's actually a manifestation of weakness.
Right.
But yeah, I think the way that I was interpreting soft was weak.
And that's classically what the word meant. Like you talked about pushy, and so part of what I always want to do anytime somebody uses this word is say, well, define the word. Because if you mean gentle, tender, warm, then that's Jesus, And for me personally, I know I'm not a physically imposing person, but I can be a jerk. And so the virtues I pray for more than any others are gentleness and patience, man. And those are, one could look at those and call them soft, but I completely disagree. That's true strength. That's meekness. I remember we had a professor, well, you didn't, you guys know the guy. Anyway, I had a professor in college who used to talk about the word meek, and he was our Greek teacher, and he would always say, meek is not weak in the Greek, because when we hear meek, we think meek and mild, maybe, or something of that nature, soft and pushovery, but meek means a bridled horse, power under control, strength that has been harnessed, and is not just going wild in every direction. So, okay, good. All right, let's see. You know what? Let's do this one quickly because it's kind of the other side of some of what we've done. Women are more empathetic than men, and this is a good thing. 3, 2, 1.
False.
True. Wow, I did not. It's just, where is this going? They were together on everything to start. Now y'all are just messing with it. Okay. False.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to define, once again, terms matter, right? There's a difference between, in my world, with sympathy and empathy. Sympathy is I feel sorry for someone. Empathy is I feel what they're going through. I think God created us all to be empathetic. I think men, we struggle with that because it makes us seem weak. But listen, if we were walking through there and someone was talking and they weren't paying attention, they walked into the corner of the door jamb and busted their head open, I would still laugh just a little because I'm a broken human being. But I would go, dang, that hurt. I feel bad for that guy. I could sense what that was. To me, that's empathy. I don't think one brand or gender has the capstone on that. I think we have a hard time showing it. But this is what Christian love is to put ourselves in the shoes of this person. So I don't think it is, I think women show it more easily, but I don't think men feel it less.
You got anything to say? Are you good?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay. Next one. More men should be serving in the church. 3, 2, 1.
False.
Okay. More men should be serving in the church. I don't even know what to do with you guys now. Okay, so 2 sentences. What do you mean?
I think more people just in general should be serving in the church,
right.
so of course more men should be serving in the church.
Okay.
I focused on in the church. Some of you guys need to get out of the building and do what you do elsewhere.
Great. Yeah. Yeah, amen. Yeah, and what we need is for all of our men to discern, how can I best allocate my time in this season of my life?
You still need to come to church.
Right,
okay?
no doubt. Yeah.
I did not give you permission to just spend Sundays playing golf, okay?
Well, yeah, amen. But it's a business meeting. So I can speak, I'm not going to put thoughts into Mark's mind, but I will say one of the things I've always respected about him as a lead pastor, as a senior minister, is he doesn't guilt people into doing more within the walls of the church. And I've always loved and appreciated that, because sometimes what can happen in churches is that leaders can accidentally communicate, and I don't work here, so I got my own job too, right? Leaders that work at the church can communicate to the rest of us, y'all need to be here working all the time, doing everything for the church. And that's an imbalance, man. Like, if all of our lives are on mission with God, if Monday through Saturday is just as much worship as Sunday, though it takes a different form, then the call is to be on mission. Now, there are some of you in the room that need to really prayerfully consider whether you could use some of the time and energy you have to specifically build up the body in concrete ways. We got young people, we got kids and youth and students and college kids who need presence and mentors and fathers. I needed other men outside of my home because there wasn't there to be present. So I benefited from that. So don't hear this as at all a guilt trip, but hear it as discern what makes most sense for you in this season, and then do that for this season, and then discern when you get to another season. Okay, man, this one could be forever, but I want to finish it. I like finishing things. Last question. Men need to hear the gospel in a way that is different than women. So again, men need to hear the gospel in a way that is different than women. 3, 2, 1.
False. True.
They've also gotten quieter. Have you noticed that? Is it just me? They're getting soft up here, and not.
It was like rock, paper, scissors. I wanted to hear the first syllable.
You did. You're just waiting.
True.
Okay, so I don't even know who's saying what anymore. You say false. Yeah. You say true. I did not expect you to say false.
You didn't?
No.
Okay.
So what do you mean?
I think the gospel is, the declaration of the lordship of Jesus and the kingdom of God is a universal declaration for all people.
Not that
now the implications of it might be different for men versus women. Like the implications of the kingdom are different for each individual that hear that declaration. So.
Yeah, I do. Let me ask you a question, because we're talking around what I'm getting at a little bit. Yes, do you love your children equally?
Yes.
Do your children need to receive your love differently?
They do.
And what I'm asking is, are there general things to be said about that dynamic with respect to the Father's love manifested in the sacrificial death of Jesus and the giving of His Spirit to transform us? Are there different ways we need to receive that?
I think I hear. Yeah. I think I hear what you're saying. So,
and you still may think no.
Broadly conceived that way. Yeah, I could understand why you would answer true to that question, because men perhaps on the whole, speaking about generalities. I think men on the whole probably do need to hear the message of the gospel perhaps in different ways. I think, and it's not any of our ambition up here to be critical of this church or any church for that matter, but I think it is safe to say that at times churches have done a really good job of appealing to sort of more the feminine spirit in the way that worship is conducted, in the way that even sermons are preached, and less effective in communicating well to the more masculine spirit of men in the room. I think that's a safe thing to say.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Mark.
I'm in agreement, even though I disagreed in the point, because I think the statement is men need to hear the gospel in a different way because men listen to the gospel in a different way. It meets a need in men that's different than women, and I think God designed it that way. That's why there's not a lot of prescriptive things. That there are prescriptive things, but there's not a whole list. Once again, God is not calling us to be men that do things. He's called us to be men, a different kind of men. And that's just a philosophy. So when I think men listen differently, my graduate degree is in communication. You wouldn't know it when I preach, but I do have one. And one of the things I learned is the message received is the message sent. I don't like that, but it's true. So knowing that I have a mixed audience with different ages and experiences, you have to present the gospel in such a way that people can understand it in the way they think and in the pinch points of their life. Chad's so right. The gospel is the gospel, and it will not change. And if we change it, we're making the biggest mistake ever made. But how you administrate it to a 6-year-old and a 40-year-old and a divorcee and a widower,
Different.
The gospel will be heard differently every time you present it.
Yeah. And I think that's what I love. I was hoping this question would go here, that really it's not just men and women. It's the gospel hits different people in different ways in all sorts of ways. And so to continue to, this is why it's so important to never stop listening to and relearning and meditating on the gospel, because you never graduate from the gospel. You never get to a point where you don't need the gospel anymore. This is the whole message of Colossians. You don't need more than the good news of Jesus that you received. You just need more of the Jesus who comes to you in that good news. That's Colossians. And that's, I think, important for us to remember, because we can get into this mindset of thinking, all right, I've got the gospel. I'm kind of bored with the good news of Jesus. Then you've forgotten who you were, and you've forgotten who you are and what God is doing in us. But this isn't a sermon, so I need to move on. Yeah, of course you can. You're in charge, man. You just say what
Control.
you want.
I want to say something because I felt pastorally last night. There were no mistakes made. So I'm going to quote my friend Michael. I'm not saying more than I'm saying. But last night, I know that there's some of us sitting in the room that heard "Stop Sinning," and you wanted to stand up like I did and scream, "How?" I don't want to be addicted. I don't want my wife to look at me with that glance ever again. I don't want to live in shame. And Shane was not shaming us. You heard him. He was challenging us. Guys, there is more power available to you than you're holding on to. So what I want to say to those of you that struggled last night with this, but tell me how. It is not in your behavior. It is in your surrender. The deeper we fall into the sanctifying power of the Holy Spirit, chains will fall off, or otherwise we would have yanked those chains off. Am I right?
Amen.
So I just want to encourage your heart today.
Yeah.
This can never be a gospel of try harder, or we'd be done. It would be over. I'd be sin-free, man. I'd be living the life. But in my brokenness, it has to be the power of the Holy Spirit. So I want to encourage those of you that are struggling. Like, this is why we're calling for prayer. It's surrender. Surrender, surrender, surrender. So if we surrender more deeply, we live more deeply. So we didn't want anybody to walk out, because Shane didn't say it, but I think the conclusion will be, well, that wasn't helpful. I don't want to sin anymore. But here's the truth. Through the power of the Holy Spirit, we can sin less.
Amen.
And there's just a power. So anyway, that was a free sermon. You don't have to come tomorrow.
Good. I like it. Good. Yeah. And make sure y'all stick around for the rest of the morning. I hope you're all planning on sticking around, because Jim's going to pick up exactly where Mark left off, Jim Dyrumpel, and he's going to be, fleshing out. Okay, what do we do next? All right. Next one, you guys could easily preach about 16 sermons apiece, so don't do that. What biblical texts provide needed wisdom for men today? Among those that you would love to share, what are some either that are really meaningful to you as a man?
His answer will be better.
On your heart?
20 seconds. I think every piece of theology in all of Scripture is founded in the first 11 chapters of Genesis. Because I believe that to be true, I want to focus on being the kind of man that Adam was called to be in the first 3 chapters of Genesis. that helps me understand what I need to be focused on in relationship to God and relationship to my spouse and my family. And I think it's all founded right there.
All right.
Yeah, I kind of already mentioned mine, but that Ephesians passage about self-sacrificial love, which is such a radically, that's a message that when Paul first wrote it down in the first century was complete, like it turned the tables on an entire culture, the expectation that men had in that culture, and it still continues to turn the tables today. Mm-hmm. That's a radical text that men need to study, learn, integrate into their lives every day. What does it look like for me to give up myself for my wife, for my family? And then I would also add, the fruit of the Spirit, which I try to pray through every day. But the fruit of the Spirit is operative for every follower of Jesus, obviously. But what I pray for specifically is, God, help me in my life today as a man, as a husband, as a father, as a leader. Help me to manifest love. What does joy look like in my life today? What does self-control look like in my life today? So praying through the fruit of the Spirit from your unique vantage point as a man.
That's awesome. And if some of y'all are here and are like, I'm not a Bible person, I don't know where these things are. The Ephesians text he's talking about is Ephesians chapter 5, verses 21 through 33. It's a description of the responsibilities of husbands and wives. And the key part in that middle is, what does God call husbands to, is a picture of what God calls men to. And then Galatians 5, I think it's Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 and 23 are the fruit of the Spirit that he's mentioning. So for me, there's a few passages that stand out in this regard as well. And one of them is kind of one of my sneaky favorite texts. And I say sneaky because it's tucked away at the end of one of Paul's letters. And I don't necessarily think about it a lot unless I'm trying to think about it. And I don't necessarily hear it talked about a lot because it's just a collection of encouragements at the end of 1 Corinthians. And it's 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verses 13 and 14. And I want to read them to you in a couple of translations, because for me, this kind of summarizes the bringing it all together that is the call for us. 1 Corinthians 16:13 says, "Be on your guard, stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong." And I love that call to just be, manly at some level. Actually, in older translations of this, and a more literal translation of this, there's another translation that we use around here that translates the same passage, "Be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong." And that stand firm is a military term where you plant your feet in the ground and you are an immovable force. That act like men, now the reason we've translated it differently is the point is not act like a man, not a woman. The point is act like a man, not a boy. And that's, I think, the important distinction to make, that we should contrast ourselves not primarily in terms of like wanting to take a step forward and advance beyond something. We should not be contrasting ourselves with the women in our life for our world, but with the boys that we once were and no longer want to be. So I love the strength of that, right? That act like a man, be strong, be courageous. But then the very next verse, 1 Corinthians 16:14 says, "Do everything in love." And this is the gentleness piece. This is the patience piece. This is the other part of this. So that, for me, 1 Corinthians 16, 13, and 14 has become a bit of a central text that I think about when I'm trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do today? How am I going to live? I got a couple others, but you look like you want to say
No,
something.
I hope that everybody heard that. Because what the point that Michael just made there is a really important point. We cannot see ourselves in opposition to the women in our lives.
Nope. We're on the same
Under no
team.
circumstance. But what we should be in the habit of doing is seeing ourselves in opposition to the boy that is constantly trying to break through in my actions and in my thoughts and in my words. Like, that's where the battle lies. That's where the conflict lies. And so I hope that you caught what Michael said right there, because it's a really, really important point.
Good. And the other passages that flesh this out, and I don't want to preach too long at you either, but man, I'll tell you, when I was thinking about this over the last couple of days, the David and Goliath story came to my mind. And this is one of the most famous stories in the Bible, where you have this young, shepherd who becomes a soldier in this moment because he steps up with nothing more than 5 smooth stones in a sling, and he takes down this great giant Goliath. And I do think there's something meaningful about the warrior component of this story and the slaying of a giant that everybody else was afraid of. We descend from warriors. We descend from fighters who stepped forward not for their own glory, but for the glory of a God who's greater than them. And that's the part of the David and Goliath story that I often miss or I often forget, and that I don't hear emphasized even when I hear the story preached. And it's the part of the story where David's problem was that this man was defying the living God. David stepped onto the scene, not as his older brothers thought, because he wanted glory, and not because he had some sort of love for his kinsmen. He stepped onto the scene because he heard a giant threatening God, defacing God, dishonoring God. And what this tells me is we descend from warriors who were worshiping something greater than themselves. And if you don't have something above you, then you will place yourself at the top. And if you don't have the right thing above you, then you will be seeking and pursuing the wrong end. So let's be like David in all the proper ways. And then the last one for me, and this verse is the one that I need to hear every single day, and it's 1 John 3:1. See what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called sons of God, and this is what we are. As men, what we need is to have our hearts healed by the gospel so that we can become strong and selfless. Because so many of us didn't get that first question answered. Am I delighted in by my Father? We did not get it answered the way it was designed to be answered. And therefore, we moved on to that next phase of our life where we're trying to figure out what we're good at. And then we allow what we're good at to try to answer the first question of whether or not we're loved. I hope you're following me. What you need to hear first is that you're delighted in by your Father who loves you and who's proven that to you in the cross. And it is this love that will transform you in all the ways that we're talking about. All right, let's kind of move toward an end here, fellas. If you could try to distill in pretty short and simple order, what would you say is the core of biblical manhood? If you could try to pull together God's call for men into a compact phrase, what would that phrase be?
I defer to Mark on this.
Well, it's such an oversimplification, but to be concise and brief, I'd simply say it this way. I believe it is a loyal commitment to the standard of grace I've been offered. It's a loyal commitment to my wife, to my children, should I be blessed with them, to my responsibilities as a follower of Jesus. It's to my friendships. It's to my community. It's to the lost world. It is a loyal commitment to the principles that are going to make a difference, not just for me. I'm going to resound with what Chad said earlier about, like, I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but that self-sacrifice is what my wife wants. It's what my sons will grow through. And so when I think about it, I believe loyalty is such a missing thing in our culture that when someone declares loyalty, I applaud them because it's so seldom seen. I mean, and so anyway, I think I would just land it there. And of course, I'm going to kick myself all the way home. Well, I could have added that, but concise.
I think broadly speaking, discipleship, and this is a very broad statement, discipleship is about celebration through sacrifice. So we celebrate who God is. We celebrate the gift of grace that we've received in Jesus Christ. We celebrate in that by sacrificing of ourselves. So discipleship is celebration through sacrifice, and it's not a grumpy sacrifice. It's not a stubborn sacrifice. It's a joyful, celebratory sacrifice. And so I would say, what is biblical manhood? Biblical manhood is celebrating the things that make us unique, distinct, and valuable as men, as God created us, in our strength, in our willingness and inclination to protect and to provide, celebrating those things that God has made us, but also celebrating through sacrifice, sacrificing those things, dedicating those things that God has gifted us with, dedicating those things to His service ultimately and to the service of those who God has entrusted to us.
That's awesome, yeah. And not surprisingly, mine would be similar, so I'll just say it and leave the explanation because that would be repeating. I think that manliness boils down to, and the call to be a man boils down to the call to harness our unique power, because I think we do have unique power, to harness our unique power to move others toward God and His will by sacrificing ourselves for the good of others. So there's a recognition that we are something, and there's a directing of that. Okay, last question, and then I'm going to add a specific tack on a part of it to the end for you, Mark, if you would. I don't know if you guys were here on Sunday, but I know you were. You heard the sermon. I preached on Sunday about the call to discipleship, and I talked about how when I was a young guy growing up in church, I often wanted to go up to men in the church and ask them, like, well, what's it like to be a grown man who loves God and leads your family to love God? And so I'd love to hear, what would each of you give as a short answer to that question? Once you go first. Because Mark, I'd love for you to answer the question in general. And I would love for you as our pastor to speak into specifically, after you answer it in a general sense. Okay, and so what does this mean for guys who are single or divorced or widowed, right? Or widower. Guys who are not in a situation where they're actively leading a family toward God right now. So what would you have said to a young me?
The first thing that I would have said is, it's awesome.
That's cool. That's good. Yeah.
You know, so I think we need to be careful that we don't put like a dark cloud on the answers that we give to this. Like, it is the pleasure of my life to raise my kids in the Lord, to partner with my wife on raising up this family. Like, it is the pleasure of it is awesome. I would not trade it in for anything. So if I were talking to a young Michael,
that's cool.
I would say, it's the most amazing thing. I can't wait till you grow up and experience it for yourself. The other thing that I would say is, what's it like to be a God? It's a responsibility, but it's a joyful responsibility that I have to raise my kids up in the Lord, to lead them well, to partner with my life and with my wife and lead her well, so that we all can be a family that is centered on and worships God together.
Amen. That's cool. I would have liked that answer.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, because words matter, one of the things that was impressed upon me as a young married man was, she's not my wife. I steward my life with her. I'm to care for her and protect her and guide her, and we all know that's difficult in a marriage relationship. They don't want us to be their dad, and we don't want them to be our mom. And so I have, my two sons are here this morning. They're not mine. God gifted them to me. So you see who they are, and you direct them, and you guide them, and sometimes you're a GPS, and sometimes you're guardrails. But if I would say to a young Michael, what is it like to lead a family? It is an overwhelming privilege. And if you go it alone, you'll fail. But if you're prayerful, and you're open to repentance in your own heart, then God can do amazing things. What my two boys have become, I take no credit for it. I'm so grateful that they were gifted to us. And together, we tried to do the very best we could to be a GPS and a guardrail all at the same time, if that makes sense. So I'd say to Michael what Chad said. The privilege of my lifetime is to be married to the girl I'm married to and to be a father to two sons. It really is. And it's been fun to see God correct my mistakes and not harm them because I was imperfect or broken or selfish and all of that. So it is a great, overwhelming privilege. Now, to those who are not currently experiencing this in your life, or there's grief in your heart because it's been gone, the greater community of the church is the answer. To be invested in the lives of others, whether Drake knew it or not, I was so appreciative of his comments at the beginning. Like, if your kids are out and they're raising their own kids, I can introduce you to some young men in this community who need a spiritual father, who need a GPS and a guardrail. There are people looking for real relationships to figure out what is coming my way. I don't know. I'm scared. And so because of that, for those of you that are in that void, the solution is in the church. And don't be surprised if you're foolish enough to ask God to bring someone into your world that you could pour into. There'll be a line. There'll be a line formed around you, because right now men are looking for relationships that are substantive beyond video games and how the Chiefs did. Guys are struggling with real issues, and they want to have someone they can talk to. You may not have the answers, but sometimes listening is the best thing you can provide. So I just encourage you, don't shut it down because you're done with your family or you didn't have a family. Open it back up, because this is what God created us to be, using the influence Michael talked about.
Awesome. Well, we want to move toward wrapping up here with a brief time of prayer, and we actually want to do something similar to what we